I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking at the Manhattan Institute.
And I am the director of the Center for State and Local Leadership here at the Manhattan Institute, and I'll be taking us through this morning's program, and it's an honor to be with all of you today. We are here today to officially launch the latest book coming out of the Manhattan Institute, Teachers Matter, Rethinking How Public Schools Identify, Reward, and Retain Great Educators by MI's scholar here, Marcus Winters. And of course, I want to remind everyone that these books are for sale outside, and I urge you as we move through the program and as you come to know and love this book that you consider purchasing a copy and telling your friends and loved ones to do the same. I'd also like to acknowledge a colleague of mine, Charles Somm, who's here today, who did so much to help bring this program together and has really helped me better understand this issue. So Charles, thank you. So before we hear from Marcus, the man we've all gathered to hear from, and we start this conversation about this issue, I'd like to show you a short video. It's a video that was produced exclusively for this conference, so you're basically the first people who will ever see it. And it really does an excellent job both of explaining a bit about the book, but framing the issue from a 30,000-foot view. And if you're like me, I trust that after viewing this video, you won't help to be somewhat overcome by the urgency and the gravity of this situation. If we could show the video now, thank you.
There's a lot of talk about education reform in America. But while politicians bicker and union leaders pressure, our country falls farther and farther behind. Students across the world were recently tested in math, science, and reading to determine how student achievement levels compare between countries. Countries such as China, Finland, Japan, and Korea scored in the top 5 of each category. The U.S. scored 17th in reading, 23rd in science, and 31st in math. We are facing an education system that fails to prepare our students for an increasingly flat, competitive world.
What we've learned over the last several years is that the system is entirely backwards.
What are the implications for America's economic future if our children cannot compete in the global economy? According to U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, this is an absolute wake-up call for America.
Great teachers are the magic ingredient in education. You'll hear people talk about everything else, but all of us, from our own experience, know great teachers transform students' lives.
Marcus Winters demonstrates in his book, Teachers Matter, that good teachers are the keystones in a successful American education system.
Teachers Matter is about proving what we already knew intuitively, that teachers are the most important piece of our public school system. Being assigned to Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Johnson down the hall can have major implications for your child. Even within the same school, the difference between one teacher and the next can realistically be a grade level's worth of learning for that child in a given year.
If we know great teachers are the magic ingredient in education, why has America failed to find the solutions that help teachers provide our children with an education competitive with other nations?
Because we have so many hardworking teachers out there who are doing amazing things for kids, and we need to become a profession that recognizes and rewards the best people.
We know the teacher is the #1 ingredient in driving performance in schools. But we've got some rules right now that will not keep the best teachers in front of students.
What the research shows is that the things prioritized by the current system, master's degrees, years of experience, don't really tell us very much, if anything, about how effective a teacher actually is in the classroom.
We find that it's almost irrelevant what their prior credentials are to their quality of teaching in the classroom.
Charter schools, such as Seth Andrews' Democracy Prep, are not constrained by public school system rules. This allows them the flexibility to make decisions about teacher employment to ensure the best results for their kids. Winters advocates similar reforms for our public school system, replacing the stale policies of the past with new policies that focus on teachers.
First, we need to open the floodgates to the teaching profession. We need to allow people to become teachers and then identify which ones are effective and which ones are not. Which means that we need to adopt an evaluation system that takes seriously evaluating how effective a teacher is in the classroom and how effective they are at increasing student achievement.
That means removing teachers who are ineffective and rewarding teachers who are effective with higher pay.
People don't understand that the only way that this nation is going to regain its positioning in the global marketplace is if we improve the public education system. We'll never be able to compete against China and India and Korea unless we are producing a well-skilled workforce.
Can we fix our broken education system? The need for education reform comes down to the decisions we make now to set the path for the future, for the next generation of American leaders. Are we going to provide the education system young people need to compete in the global marketplace? Right now, we are not.
What's at stake when we talk about reforming public education is nothing less than America's future.
Marcus Winters outlines the path to success in his new book, Teachers Matter. He proves that the way we hire, train, compensate, and evaluate public school teachers is entirely backwards and must change.
There is no other profession that simultaneously requires the most competent and innovative professionals and at the same time can discourage these professionals from bringing their gifts to our kids. We must be able to significantly reward teachers who are successful and to exit those teachers who, even with the correct supports, are unable to increase student achievement and academic growth.
Read Teachers Matter today and discover how we can bring our education system back from the brink of disaster.
So it's that simple. Just read the book and we're going to solve the problems. No, that obviously is not that simple. But let's start right now. As the title of Marcus's book implies, and we spent quite a bit of time internally talking about the title of this book, it's quite simple. Teachers do matter. And how we evaluate them is critical to ensuring that we have the most effective, the most efficient, the most responsive public education system in the world. So to preview the findings from his book and give you insight into really how he came to his conclusions, because that's what we want to understand. How did he put A and B together to get to C? I'd like to introduce you to the author of Teachers Matters, Marcus Winters. Marcus is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He is assistant professor at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. He conducts research and he writes extensively on school choice, high school graduation rates, accountability, special education, and obviously teacher evaluation and retention. His research has appeared in just about every publication relative to this issue, including Education, Finance, and Policy, The Economics of Education Review, and Teachers College Record. And in the more popular media, you've read his op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and USA Today, among others. It's my honor to introduce you to Marcus Winters.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and thanks all of you for being here. Thanks to Joel Klein and for all of our fantastic panelists for coming out to talk about this really important issue. And so, in a room like this, I don't have to spend a lot of time talking about why we're here, why we need to reform public schools. I think the video does a great job. I wish that I had background music at all times behind me, like the video has. It does a great job of making the case about how American students are falling behind their peers in the rest of the world, and if we're going to be competitive economically and politically in the future, we need to produce a skilled workforce capable of competing in a global economy. That would be a bad enough problem. But then we couple that with the problem that school quality is not distributed evenly in the United States. In fact, the students most in need of going to great public schools are often the ones least likely to have access to them. So students from lower incomes who are more heavily minority are the ones least likely to find themselves in great public schools. And those two problems together really produce a massive problem. So Teachers Matter is a book about improving the public school system through teacher quality. And it's not a book about, though, Teachers Matter is not a book about what makes a great teacher great, what are we looking for, what attributes does a great teacher have. These are enormously important questions. In fact, our panelists have, those are questions that they think about pretty often. But they're not exactly the questions I'm looking at in this book. In this book, what I'm asking is, how should we structure the employment relationship with public school teachers in order to maximize teacher quality and minimize its variation? Then we ask, is the current system well designed for these important tasks? And if not, what would an effective system look like? So this book is about how do we structure the government? How do we structure the public school system in order to get the best out of our teachers? So these are questions that we can ask today because of an empirical revolution that's been going on in the study of education policy. Over the last 2 decades, we've developed a massive amount of evidence evaluating teacher quality and the factors related to teacher quality, and this information really is game-changing. So in Teachers Matter, what I'm hoping to do, what I try to do is bring together this research and use it to provide lessons about the wisdom of the current system and how we might change it to ensure that all students are taught by a high-quality teacher. What I conclude is that the current system for employing public school teachers, how they're recruited, how they're retained, how they're compensated, is entirely backwards. So it's best to start with a quick consideration of the structure of the current system. So in short, the current system uses a series of screens in order to weed out people before they enter the classroom, and then essentially assumes that they're equally effective conditional on their years of experience and the number of credentials that they have. So how does the system work? Well, in order to enter the classroom in the first place, a prospective teacher is required to earn a degree from a college of education and to be certified. Once they enter the classroom, a novice teacher is placed on a probationary period that usually lasts about 3 years. During this time, the teacher can actually be fired. And in fact, we see very large attrition of teachers during this time period. But if the teacher manages to last until their 3rd year, which is most teachers who don't just leave on their own, they will typically receive tenure. And tenure is going to ensure that they can't be removed from the school system without going through a due process proceeding. Well, what's wrong with that? We like due process in the United States. That sounds just fine. The problem is that the due process required to fire a tenured teacher in the United States is so burdensome and has such little probability of success that most principals and school systems don't even try to remove even the worst performing teachers. During their time in the classroom, the teacher's hardly going to be evaluated at all. Teacher evaluations are based primarily on classroom observations by the principal that take place once, maybe twice a year, and often are for less than a full class period. So at least it used to be the case, it might still be in Miami-Dade, that the official evaluation need not last longer than 20 minutes. So it's typical under this evaluation system for about 99% of teachers to be identified as satisfactory or above according to their official evaluations. Nor is the teacher's compensation going to be based on any consideration on their performance in the classroom. In the vast majority of school systems, teacher compensation is based on 2 factors: the number of years they've been in the classroom and the number of advanced degrees that they have. The salary schedule does not include any line item for how much the teacher students learn, nor does it have any consideration for how many late nights they stay up working on lesson plans and grading papers, or for how much they work to try to help their struggling colleagues improve. So the system I've described, with admittedly a broad brush, only makes sense if a few things are true. It must be the case that teachers with advanced degrees and more experience are more effective than our other teachers. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense to prioritize only those characteristics. It must be the case that those who go to education college prior to entering teaching are more effective than those who don't. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to reduce the labor pool to include only those who decide to go get a teaching degree. And finally, it must be the case that once they've been screened and enter the classroom, all teachers are about equally effective. Otherwise, a system that fails to differentiate between the best and the worst teachers is missing an enormous opportunity. So at a distance, these conditions don't seem so ridiculous, actually, on the surface. Public schools are not the only employers who compensate employees based on credentials and experience. It makes sense that teachers with master's degrees and more experience are going to tend to be more effective. Nor are teachers the only professionals who are required to earn a certification before they enter their field. And finally, since teachers have received very similar training and must all go through the tenure process, it doesn't appear to be much room for there to be variation in teacher quality. But what's changed? What's changed is that an influx of quantitative research has tested each of these relationships. An underlying theme of Teachers Matter is how the influx of data and empirical research in education has provided new information, and that this new information has consequences for the wisdom of the current system. So once at the forefront of experimental research, education fell into what Thomas Cook called a science phobia, in which quantitative research was devalued in favor of research and development approach. The modern standards and testing movements changed all that, and it changed all that by producing mountains of quantitative data measuring student achievement. This data enticed quantitative researchers, particularly economists, to enter the field and begin studying how policies and factors within public schools are related to what we care about most, student achievement. This research challenges the assumptions of the current system. Modern empirical research provides 3 essential lessons. It provides more than that, but I'd argue 3 essential lessons about teacher quality that blow apart the foundations of the current system. Teachers are important, teacher quality varies, and almost nothing we observe about teachers correlates with teacher quality. If taken seriously, those lessons make the current system simply indefensible. So let's think about each of those in turn. Teachers are important. In fact, research shows that they're the most important factor within a school for determining how much a student is going to learn in a given year. Now, that lesson is simply confirming what most of us all intuitively know, right? If you ask anyone on the street what's the most important factor of schools, they'll probably tell you it's the quality of their teachers. Second, teacher quality varies. Now, this lesson is closely linked to the first, but it's enormously important and worth thinking about on its own. The best estimates indicate the difference between a student being assigned to a teacher in the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile can mean a grade level's worth of learning for that child in a given year. This lesson is only quantifying what many of us already suspected and what's an open secret in most public schools. Some teachers are great, some teachers are bad, and there's a lot of teachers in the middle. Third, almost nothing we observe correlates with teacher quality. This lesson is not as intuitive at first, but it's one of the most robust findings in quantitative research in education policy. Attainment of a master's degree is simply not related to teaching effectiveness. As for years of experience, the results are a little bit more nuanced, but not much better for those who would argue for the current system. Essentially, what the research shows that a teacher is at her worst in the very first year, gets a little bit better the few years after that. After about year 3 or 5, their achievement, the increases from experience plateaus. Right? And this is a very, very consistent finding that we have in the research. But even more detailed measures of a teacher's training and makeup tell us next to nothing about how effective they're going to be in the classroom. SAT scores, the college they attended, what course they took in college, all have found to tell us very little about teacher quality. In fact, about 97% of the variation in teacher quality cannot be explained by the easily observed characteristics prioritized by the current system. When we think about it, though, that might not be intuitive at first. When we think about it, maybe it's not quite as counterintuitive as it first seems. What makes a great teacher might be attributes such as kindness, patience, the ability to convey complex information to students, many of whom don't want to be there in the first place. Those might be factors, at least partially, that are innate, that are about you, and might not be factors that are shared by everyone who gets a master's degree. So the consistent findings from modern research blow away the foundations of the current system. Why treat teachers as if they're equally effective if we know that their quality varies dramatically? Why reward credentials and experience if those factors are unrelated to effectiveness? And why force teachers to pass through screens if we can't identify, if those screens don't help us to identify which teachers are going to be great and which teachers are not? So modern research points us towards a very different system for employing public school teachers than the one we have today. In fact, we should be turning that system completely on its head. Instead of screening teachers beforehand and then assuming that they're doing a good job, we should be increasing access to the teaching profession, then spending our focus on evaluating which teachers are effective and which teachers are not, and then acting accordingly. And in Teachers Matter, I talk about a series of recommendations along those lines. Just a few of them. So who should teach? Well, again, like I said in the video, we should open the floodgates to the teaching profession. Any college graduate who can convince a principal to hire them should be eligible to teach in a public school. We shouldn't be putting up hurdles to become a teacher if those hurdles don't help us distinguish who's going to be great at it and who's not. Our experiences with alternative certification program, most importantly Teach for America, lead us in that direction. So what that research shows is that alternatively certified teachers look to be a little bit more effective than are their more experienced colleagues on average. Now it's true that there's variation in the quality of TFA and other alternative certified teachers, but there's wide variation in teacher quality of the existing teacher workforce. So the lesson isn't that we should be removing all of our existing teachers and replacing them with TFAers. That's not the lesson that we need to take. But the lesson is it doesn't particularly matter how you enter the classroom for how effective you're going to be. So we should be allowing people to become teachers and then evaluating which ones are effective and which ones aren't. So how should we be evaluating teachers? Well, the empirical finding that there's wide variation in teacher quality would make the results of current evaluation systems where 98.9% of teachers are found to be effective as laughable if they weren't so tragic. An evaluation that fails to distinguish between great, mediocre, and downright bad teachers is worse than useless. We need to instead develop an evaluation system that focuses on what we care about most, the teacher's independent contribution to student learning. An informative evaluation system would use both qualitative tools, including principal observations, which are very useful, and quantitative tools, in particular value-added measures of teacher quality, in order to identify the most and least successful teachers. Developing a useful evaluation system might be the most important thing on our agenda today. And the reason for that is that other reforms are premised on the idea that we can distinguish between the great teachers and the not-so-great teachers. So getting the evaluation system right is an important step. Once we have an evaluation system capable of distinguishing between the best and worst teachers, the next step is obvious. We need to act upon that information. We need to remove ineffective teachers. Teachers who are not making a difference in the lives of their students should be removed from the classroom. Job protections in the form of tenure, if they're going to be given at all, need to be reserved for our very best teachers, and only after they've demonstrated themselves to be our very best teachers over a sustained period of time. No student should have to suffer with a bad teacher simply because they've been in the classroom for more than 3 years and therefore can't be fired. We need to reward effective teachers. Great teachers should earn higher salaries than do bad teachers. Teachers' compensation should be tied to their effectiveness in the classroom. Now, some people might think it's against type, but I actually argued in the book that we shouldn't expect performance pay to have a very large impact on the quality of existing teachers. My argument for that is that it's actually the case that there's many teachers out there who are already working as hard as they possibly can, right? Some of them are very effective, some of them aren't, right? Those teachers actually exist. Actually, in my own head, I call it the Robin rule after a friend of mine who was a kindergarten teacher, and I would see her working late nights and coming home late on Saturdays, cutting out construction paper and working for her kids. And by all accounts, she's a great teacher. Paying her more, paying teachers like that more is probably the right thing to do, right? It's probably the just and right thing to do. They deserve more salaries. But for a teacher like that, do we really expect them to work even harder for the additional pay? Maybe, maybe not, right? They might already be contributing as much as they want, or as much as they can. There's also a pool of teachers who are capable that might not, but also might not be working to the best of their abilities. Now, performance pay should have an effect on them, but they're not the vast majority of teachers. So why should we do this? Why does performance pay matter? Well, the way that performance pay can matter is by increasing the salaries of effective teachers relative to ineffective teachers. It makes staying in the teaching profession more attractive for effective teachers than it does for the bad teachers, right? And which is why simply increasing salaries under the current system should not be expected to dramatically increase teacher quality. The reason for that is that higher salaries that are given to everyone are just as attractive to bad teachers as they are to great teachers, right? We need to differentiate between teachers. By differentiating teacher pay according to their effectiveness, we can motivate teachers to perform to the best of their abilities and hopefully offer salaries that are able to compete for our best teachers. If we're to take the lessons from modern research seriously, then we should be moving towards a public school system that looks very different from the one we have today. The current system might have made intuitive sense before, but modern research findings make it simply indefensible. Now, defenders of the current system like to argue that those who propose reforms like I'm talking about are scapegoating teachers, are against teachers in some meaningful way, which is simply not true, and actually is very, very frustrating. In fact, it's the current system that fails to recognize great teaching. Right? A system that fails to distinguish between its great teachers and its bad teachers is not a system that values teachers. Right? A system that treats all teachers as if they're identical is the same as a system that treats teachers as if they don't even matter. So improving educational outcomes for American students means reforming its public schools. And we can't hope to improve public school system without addressing the quality of its teachers. We need to develop a system that gives great teachers the opportunity to succeed and removes those teachers who, for whatever reason, simply don't have what it takes. In short, we need to finally recognize that teachers matter. And that basic and that obvious premise has consequences for the entire public school system. Thanks very much.
At this point, we have time for one or two questions related to Marcus's presentation. But in the meantime, if the panelists could come up so that we can move seamlessly into the next portion of the program, that would be great as well. Do we have any hands out there? Ma'am, right there. And just wait for the microphone. And if you could just state your name and any affiliation you might have, that'd be great.
My name's Lisa Nielsen. I'm a writer with a blog called The Innovative Educator. And my question that would be burning on my mind is, it looked like from the video and your talk that you're rating teacher effectiveness on bubble tests. Can you confirm or deny that?
Confirm or deny that? I will confirm that a big part of what we're talking about, so I talked about in my talk how we should be using both qualitative and quantitative tools, right? So in the quantitative tool we're talking about is value-added measures of teacher quality, which yes, come from student standardized test scores, which are admittedly imperfect. And we certainly wouldn't want a system that pays teachers exclusively based on them, for a variety of reasons. They don't tell us everything we want to know about students, and value added is measured with substantial error. So they don't tell us everything we want to know about teachers either. But the real question is, do they tell us something about teacher quality that we're not getting right now? And actually the research shows that a teacher's value added measure, the quantitative measure from such a bubble test, is much more accurate predictor of how effective the teacher is going to be in the classroom several years later than are the characteristics we're using now. So yes, they're imperfect. The perfect evaluation system is certainly not with us. But one that utilizes quantitative tools is going to be very superior to what we have now.
Okay, we have time for one more. Anyone on this side of the room? All right, sir. You had your hand up. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Graham Kirby. I'm an independent researcher and educational civic activist from Long Island. As we know from anecdote and research, union-dominated school boards don't hire the best teachers anyway, but it's worse than that. Getting my point. Even after that, my experience, teachers are blue-collar teamsters. There is a blue wall of silence and similar blue-collar work attitudes. Essentially, there's what I know or notice, there's pressure not to excel, not to do more than the average. I know of one teacher in my district who was on tenure, she did too much, she was denied tenure by the union. My thought is, when you do have pay for performance, will there be teacher pressure on people not to earn above average salaries because it will make the others look bad?
So that's the question on teacher performance and salaries.
So it's certainly possible that, so one of the reasons the union likes lockstep pay is it puts everyone in the same boat, right? We don't like to differentiate between the quality of teachers, but that's not a reason not to do it, right? We want a system that rewards effective teachers more than it rewards ineffective teachers. And as far as when teachers enter into the profession, one of our biggest problems is we have a very difficult time telling who's going to be a great teacher and who's not before they actually enter the classroom, which is why the current system is entirely backwards, right? The current system is all about making it difficult to become a teacher in the first place and then just leaving you alone and assuming you're doing a good job, when actually it needs to be exactly the opposite situation, right? We don't know what it is, what to look for when we're looking for great teachers, particularly in a large public school system, right? So, smaller charter schools might have idea of more exactly what they're looking for, right, and more time to spend on it. But the lesson from that is we need to allow people to become teachers and then focus on them afterwards, right? That's the only way we can really hope to identify effective teachers and then act accordingly.
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.